getting them involved in as many activities as they can be involved in.
Great.
Wow. Shall we let you get on then?
Yeah, let me
pray. We should pray.
Yeah.
Come on, Christians. Remember that sometimes.
That is good.
Shall I pray? Because
go for it.
Right. Father God, thank you for this time. Thank you for all of us here. Thank you for Andrew and the time he's put in preparation. First of all, we just want to pray that everything works, pray the technology holds up, pray that all of our broadband holds together. And we just want to pray that you would bless Andrew and you bless us as we listen and be in this time and inspire us as we go along. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Reminder to put your questions in the question box. If anything pops into your mind while Andrew's talking, do that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right, and I'm just going to share my screen.
Well.
Great. Well, thank you all. This is very strange to have you in my basement with me. So I'm just going to talk like we're having coffee together and see where the conversation goes. I'm going to go for about 20 minutes here. In my time, it will be 5 after 9. I'm not going to do the math on your side because I will humiliate myself. But I'll talk for about 20 minutes. We'll probably abruptly stop, and then we'll have panel discussion and some conversation, and then we can go from there. So like I said, I'm going to just touch on some information, maybe whet your appetite for my book, The End of Youth Ministry. And the subtitle is really kind of where we're going. My parents don't really care about youth groups and what youth workers should do about it. Now, I do have to say off the top that I'm embedded in North America, and in some ways this book was directed towards most primarily a North American conversation. I think it will have a lot of relevance and connection for folks in the UK, but we'll have to nuance it as we go, and trust that you'll have questions and comments to kind of steer it in that direction. But so let's jump in. Let me start by just sharing 2 stories that I use in the book that kind of frame the book in many ways. A few years ago, I got an email from a young woman who is a university student in a youth ministry training program, and I was at a conference and she asked if we could talk. Now, I figured she wanted to do a master's degree, so I was prepared in all sorts of recruiting mode to be able to tell her why she should come to my school and do a master's degree studying practical theology and in youth ministry and things like that. So we talked, and she nicely listened to my pitch. But then she had a larger question, and she said, I just have this undergraduate youth ministry degree, and I just finished an internship, but I'm not really sure why I should do youth ministry at all. I'm not really sure why I should do it. She said, what I noticed in my internship is that a lot of kids would just disappear during different times of the year. And it was really hard to get people involved. It was really hard for parents to get their kids involved in all the programs and all the things that we were doing. She said, I didn't blame parents for this. I mean, when I was a young person, gymnastics was really important to me, and my church was really important, but I would disappear from my church from basically October to April in gymnastics. And she said, I just am not sure if I want to do youth work. I'm wondering if it might be better if I just become a coach, because at least that's a thing that that young people are really into. And what I found really interesting was this sense of the thing. And so then I started doing some interviews with parents, and I interviewed one set of parents that had no affiliation to the church. They're middle-class folks, probably hadn't been into a church in a decade, but they had 3 small kids, and they were great parents. I mean, they were far better parents than I was. But when I asked them to talk about their family, they had one word, and they said it was basketball. And basically all their family did was basketball. They had 3 daughters ranging from like 9 to 14. And all 3 girls were on a travel basketball team. In the United States, we have this thing called AAU basketball, which is a very high level basketball. And all 3 daughters were in that. The parents coached. And they basically told me that they spent 5-6 nights, or they had 5 or 6 games a week between their kids. The weekends were just 8 to 8 games, and they were practicing every night of the week. I said, all we do in our family is basketball, laundry, and repeat. That's basically all we do. And then they kind of got the sense that I thought this was a lot. And they said, well, let me be clear. I mean, you don't have to play basketball in our family, but our kids have to stay busy. They have to be doing something. And then they used the same words that this young woman used, and they said, we just want our kids to find their thing. What's really important for our kids is that they find their thing. So I want to unpack this idea of a thing. And I think we're often in youth ministry think of youth ministry as a thing and are fighting for it to have some kind of value. as a thing up against other things. So what do I mean by the thing? What is a thing? Well, I think the thing is something a young person is actively involved in. So it's something usually that the young person is passionate about. You can think of their sport, their instrument, maybe their thing is trying to get into an Oxbridge school. So it's something that you invest a lot of time in. And usually parents, maybe even more so than kids, have a sense that it's good for their kid. And usually the thing offers some kind of resources as well. Like it provides some kind of resources for your kids. But I think it's even deeper than that a little bit, that the thing is also really connected to identity in the good life. So getting your kid involved in their sport, in football, say as I was told at 9 or 10 in the UK, all of a sudden football starts being on Sunday mornings. There's a sense that football is important because of how it connects to identity and how it connects to the good life. So at least for these next about 15 minutes or so, let me start to get into these two of identity and the good life as we try to unpack for you what the thing is or how the thing works. So if we think about identity, this identity having this kind of driving question of who am I think culturally we tend to think that identity is almost a fully or completely internal thing. Like in other words, sometime around maybe 11, 12, for sure by 13 or 14, a young person, the illusion is I think that the young person goes to her room, kind of maybe watches some YouTube videos, but at some point comes out of her room and says, this is me, this is my identity, this is how I understand myself. That there's this sense that it's an internal quest that you're on to define who you are, and that in some ways it has to be completely, fully original. Now, I think one of the issues for parents in our Western context, in kind of our Western, even secular context, is it becomes really hard to pass on values to your child, especially inside of this kind of sense that identity is an internal quest. So you have to figure out, how do you impact your young person's identity without thrusting too much influence on it, that you have to let your child kind of find who they are. So this really is connected to another concept I've worked in another book called Faith Formation in the Secular Age. But in there, drawing from the work of Charles Taylor, I try to show how much our culture is really embedded in what's called the age of authenticity. And the age of authenticity is embedded in the sense of an ethic of authenticity. And the ethic of authenticity says that no human being should tell another human being what it means for them to be human. So that we all are kind of on a journey to find our own authentic way of being ourselves, that our own identities have to be authentic. So that becomes a little problematic as a parent, because if you're going to honor this ethic of authenticity, you can't really put too much pressure on your young person in how they might answer this question, who am I? You in some ways have to help them discover this organically or find this internally. And again, I think this is more of an illusion than true. There's this sense that your self-definition is hidden somewhere inside of yourself, and you need to find what that is. So there becomes this kind of transition, I think, in late modern parenting, where parenting really is about kind of cajoling and helping a young person find this internal sense of who they are. And that can be really difficult, because if you put too much pressure on, you violate the ethic of authenticity. If you become too heavy-handed with how you parent even a 10, 11-year-old and not let them find their unique self, it can become problematic. Now, there's a lot of really good things with that, but that also changes things. And this is working us around to think of what the kind of the thing actually is, as I'm using that kind of obscure phrase. But I want us to think about, maybe go back a couple decades, at least in the United States. You go back maybe to the early 80s, and there really, when you think of identity, there really was maybe 4, 8, 10 different kind of identity categories you could be in. Through this pandemic, one of the things we've done is we have neighbors who have kids about the same age as my kids. I have a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old, almost 13-year-old. And one of the things that we've done during social distancing is we've gotten a projector out and did like sit-in movies, where we showed a movie on our bathroom shower curtain with a projector, and they sit in their yard and we sit in our yard and watch these movies. But we decided to watch John Hughes movies. So the first movie we watched was Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and it was actually surprisingly better than I remember. And then the second movie we watched was Pretty in Pink, which was surprisingly way worse than I remember. but particularly John Hughes movies. And the most classic, of course, is The Breakfast Club. And one of the reasons The Breakfast Club was a classic John Hughes film, or just a classic movie of the 1980s, is because the detention, if you remember this movie, or some of you are far, far too young to remember this movie, so you should stream it. But there was 7 or 8 kids who were in detention in an American high school, and they basically fit each of the high school identities you could be at the time. So even back in the 80s, you pretty much could only pick 4, 5, 6 different kind of identity routes you could be in. And now this is just escalated to an incredible amount. And now we kind of do have this assumption that your identity doesn't fit maybe 6, 7 different kind of identities, the jock or the nerd or whatever, but that every individual can create their own unique identity in and of themselves. Now, another example of this, and I have to be really clear about this because I don't want you to misunderstand me, but if you did youth ministry back in, say, the 90s, bullying was just part of it. Now, I'm not making a case that bullying is good, but it was always an annoying thing that kids would get bullied and you didn't know really how to deal with it in youth ministry, and you tried to stop it, but things have completely, but you kind of at one point or another just ignored it and moved on in many ways. And now, even in my kids' school, bullying is zero tolerance. If you are bullying another kid, you get suspended from school. There's zero tolerance for bullying. And I think that's a real gain that we have in our culture. But one of the reasons we have it is because we used to assume, even a couple decades ago, a couple generations ago, is that bullying could have, we assumed, I think we were wrong about this, but we assumed it could have a good to it. And that is that there's only 7 or 8 identity options, and as soon as you start acting weird outside those 6 or 7 identity options, you get bullied back onto one of those paths. But now we have zero tolerance for bullying because we do really kind of assume that every individual has a right to define uniquely and originally for themselves what it means for them to be them. And this is where the thing becomes really important, because as a parent, you don't feel like you have a lot of control in helping your kid define that, or you're not sure how you do that, or you can't necessarily pass on too heavy-handed maybe religious perspectives or moral perspectives, but what you can do is get your kid involved in a lot of things. So if your kid gets involved in football or plays piano and has a great piano teacher, or whatever other activities, that those activities can have an impact on their identity. So the thing becomes a way to kind of impact the identity. Now, I imagine in the UK you don't have this store called Play It Again Sports, but in the US we have this sporting goods store, and it's called, as you can see, Play It Again. And what it is it's a store where you can sell your used sporting equipment. I'm sure you have one of these in the UK, where you can sell your used sporting equipment and you basically get like 20 cents back on the dollar. So if you spent $100 on a baseball bat, you get $2 when you sell it to them. But that is actually a really good thing for people, and people do it because Play It Again Sports exists as all the discarded or failed things that exist, particularly in middle-class people's garages and basements. If you go into middle-class people's garages, at least in the United States, you'll find that gymnastics leotard that was used once, that pair of golf clubs that was used, once or twice and discarded. And what you can do is go to Play It Again Sports and cash in all those failed things, those things that didn't stick, that didn't become part of your kid's identity, and at least get 20 cents back on the dollar. So Play It Again Sports becomes kind of the graveyard of things. But again, this shows that the thing becomes an important way that you help your young person build their identity and find their place in the world. To give you a kind of social scientific example of this, there's a great book called Unequal Childhoods by a researcher named Larno, and she has this concept she used called concerted cultivation. And what she wants to talk about, particularly with middle-class folks that are a lot of folks who are in our congregations, that the way they kind of think about parenting is this concerted cultivating of their kids' lives. So getting their kids involved in all sorts of activities is how they feel like they become really good parents. That parenting is about the involvement in this kind of menu of things. Now, I want to move us just a little bit forward here as we think about this. So this becomes an issue of identity. So the thing helps your young person figure out their identity, but it's even bigger than that. And I want to just start talking about this for about 5 or 6 minutes, and then we'll take a break, and I can get some kind of feedback from the panel on how this is going and where it connects with you, and we can nuance it a little bit. But so finding the thing not only helps your young person kind of find their identity, but like I said, the thing usually has some connection to a sense of a good life. So we do tend to have this sense, at least middle class people have this sense, that if their kids are going to live a good life, they have to be involved in a kind of lot of different things. Now, we are these weird beings, human beings, that we're probably the only animals, at least the only animals that we know of, that really care about living a good life. Like, we tend not to think other animals worry about having wasted their life. Like, Max the beetle, we don't think, oh, poor Max, he spent his whole life, he's 12 now, he's an old dog, and he spent his whole life wasting it, laying in sunbeams and licking his own butt or something like that. We tend not to think that about animals, but human beings, we deeply feel like human beings, as human beings, that we need to live a good life, that we don't want to waste our life. There has to be value within our lives. So parents make all sorts of decisions for their kids because they do have a sense, or they do deeply desire for them as parents to live good lives, but they really, and I can think in an altruistic way, want their kids also to be living a good life. So this deep sense of this kind of moral idea of what it means to be a good life stretches really, really deeply. I mean, almost into the point where you can, if you're listening for it, you can hear it come up in all sorts of conversations, and sometimes really quite benign conversations. For instance, there's a little grocery store in my neighborhood called Speedy Market, which is a picture of it. And now if you were to go in, you'd have to have a mask, and there would be social distancing and things like that. But I go every week to get our milk and eggs for the week. And a few times it's happened, and it's been very embarrassing that I've taken the milk. And usually I would bring my own bags, but now, I don't know if this is true in the UK, but we can't, because of the pandemic, can't bring our own bags anymore. We have to use the bags there. Or earlier than this, if I had forgotten my bags, I would go and I'd put my milk on the counter, and then the 20-year-old person checking me out would say paper or plastic. And this is very embarrassing, but a few times, it's happened more, well, probably close to a half dozen times. I've put my milk up, the young man has asked paper or plastic, and I've said, giving way too much commentary, I'll take plastic. And then I've said, well, I'll take plastic because, I have a dog, as I've told you about. And I said, because I have a dog, and I use them for poop bags. Why I think he cares that I have a dog who poops a lot, I have no idea. But I feel this incredible need to tell him that I'm the kind of person who knows it's not good to use plastic bags, that I'm the kind of person who's trying to live a good life, and that I use those for another purpose. And of course, it even stretches deeper, because I'll say, yeah, I'll take plastic, and then I make my embarrassing commentary on why I want plastic, and then he doesn't seem to care. And maybe it's because, well, he just doesn't care because he's been thinking about something else, or really didn't hear me. But then I do a kind of moral judgment on him, and I think, well, is he the kind of spoiled brat 20-year-old that doesn't know that it's bad for the environment to use plastic bags? So this sense of always being aware of what's a good life and how we live a good life is pretty central to being a human being. Now, when I walk out of that Speedy Market, I may see a neighbor, and the neighbor will stop me and say, hey, your kid's good? And my response will be, yeah, my kids are good. And almost always when I respond, my kids are good, what I'll then rattle off is a list of activities my kids are in. Oh, yeah. Owen's doing great. He's playing piano. It's going really well. Maisie, oh, yeah, you should see, she's in these art classes and things are going great. Like, the way I even talk about what a good life is are the things my kids are involved in, the activities that they're doing. Now, I want you to imagine, and we may have to kind of leave this for our session too, but I want us to imagine, what if we asked the church that question? Are your kids good? And how would we respond to that? Now, someone else can write this doctoral dissertation, but I think there is a doctoral dissertation or an MA dissertation on how models of children's ministry and youth ministry shift when moral imagination shifts. And I think we're in a time where a certain moral imagination is shifting. But to step back and think about asking that question, are the kids good? Are your kids good? And to ask that to the church. For instance, if you were to ask that, say in London in the 18th century, are kids good? If you were to ask that to the church, the response probably would have been, well, not really. I mean, what's wrong is that early industrialization is happening. A lot of young people aren't reading. Education is going poorly. Yeah, things are bad in that way. So then when you get birthed, of course, is Robert Reich and the Sunday school movement. Or if you were to ask that in the 19th century in America, are the kids good? You would have got, well, there's a lack of commitment. There's new urbanization coming. So you get new forms of youth ministry. You get this thing called Christian Endeavor, and then you get the YMCA movement. But if you were to ask that question after the war, in kind of the youth ministry after World War II and into the late 20th century, are the kids good? What you would have gotten was, well, yeah, they're okay, but they're living in new suburbs, some of them. And what we're worried about is they seem to be growing up too quickly. And they were in some ways growing up too quickly, or at least that was kind of the worry, that they were growing up too quickly. And one of the reasons that it seemed like they could grow up too quickly is because they had an incredible amount of time. Like in the 80s and the 90s, young people had a lot of time, and a lot of time to just try on adult activities and adult behaviors. And there's a real cultural difference. And to give you a kind of touchstone for this, think of Stranger Things, which you probably streamed 6 times since the pandemic has started. And tragically, the new season of Stranger Things has been put on hiatus because of the pandemic. But if you watch Stranger Things, the show can really only work as a period piece. Like, it's based in, what is it, 84 or 85, and it couldn't work if it was 2014. Like, there would be no time for this group of young people to fight demigorgs from another dimension, because they would have traveling football they had to get to, or there would be test prep classes, or their mom would just have a cell phone that they would be tracking them on the whole time. But if you watch the show, you know that these kids have an incredible amount of free time. And the Wheelers, Mikey's parents, are actually great 1980s parents who give their kids a ton of space. And Mr. and Mrs. Wheeler are kind of clueless, and clueless in a way that's funny for us living in our time, but fits this kind of 1980s parenting where you just gave your kids free space. And in that free space, they could do all sorts of crazy things. Now, I don't know if you all grew up with this movie. This may be a very American movie, but it's called Fast Times at Ridgemont High, which was a classic. Anyone my age in America kind of grew up sneaking this movie and watching it when our parents told us we couldn't watch it. This is the movie that made Sean Penn, and one of the greatest characters in Hollywood cinema of all time, Jeff Spicoli, as you see him right there. But it was based off of actually Cameron Crowe, who went undercover at a San Diego high school and then wrote this screenplay based off of that experience. And if you watch it now, which I did see it on some streaming service and watched like a half an hour of it, it's amazing how old the kids seem. And in some sense, of course, they are old because they're actors who are playing high school kids who are probably in their mid-20s. But on another level, just the dynamics of the cultural reality is that kids seem to be growing up much more quickly. The movie starts with a 15-year-old sneaking out of her parents' room, just wanting so badly to hook up with someone, working a job at a pizza parlor. The kids seem really old. And youth ministry, in the kind of classic congregational youth ministry, particularly that gets globalized from America, really was a response to these fast times, that things were going really fast, that kids were growing up too quickly. And congregational based youth ministry, in some ways children's ministry, but more youth ministry here, really came about as a way of trying to help slow young people down, help them not grow up too quickly, which, at least in the American form of youth ministry, is why it was always usually a younger youth worker, often male, who was pretty kind of goofy and crazy and basically a kid. And the youth ministry basically consisted of playing games and being silly, because the whole point was to give them another option with all the free time they had to be driving fast, smoking cigarettes, doing drugs, and having sex, to come and have some fun in youth ministry. But this becomes the kind of cliffhanger as we go to piece 2, is I think we've seen a great flip. And the cultural moral imaginary that leads the thing to have such power is that it might be possible across the Western world that kids aren't growing up too quickly, that it isn't fast times anymore, but things have slowed down a great deal. And that parenting has shifted from a kind of permissiveness of space to a monitoring, and a monitoring through kind of scheduling and getting your kid involved in all sorts of things. So I'm going to leave that as a cliffhanger here and try to unpack what that kind of flip looks like. But let's have some discussion with our panel. I think I'm at right time, a few minutes past time, so we'll invite the panelists back. I'll stop sharing my screen here, and I can find out where I have confused you deeply.
Well, thank you very much. There's been some appreciation on, I need to introduce myself. Hi, I'm James Fawcett from Concrete and from the Diocese and from With. Yes, and this is Joy, who also works for me. Joy.
Hi, I'm Joy. I work for Concrete, and when I'm not doing that, I am a chaplain in a college in Beckton, which is East London. And before I did that, I was a youth worker and looked after a youth project. So I've been doing youth work for a while. Concrete.
Yeah, we'll answer that later. I'll put a link in. Levi will send you a link. Wow, there was loads there. There was some like a definite appreciation for the movie choices I saw and TV choices. And Sam particularly liked dogs with glasses on.
Class on board for that.
Keep it simple. I think hopefully it went in a bit deeper. I thought I had two thoughts really that I thought was the mixed identity piece was really interesting. And that there's loads of different types of identity that young people are like, I guess, playing with, trying on, not like engaging with. And I think that's really interesting. It's certainly really interesting in central London, where I'm based and where I live, where young people are also putting on different like cultural clothes, sort of metaphorically. They're playing around with like different languages, they're playing around with different faiths, they're playing around with like all different things. And actually like, the creation of the identity is not like, you wouldn't be able to say, well, that person is that. They are mixing those all the time. And sometimes when you put them together in a room, they come up with a whole new thing that they're creating. And so there's like the identity suddenly becomes water that you're trying to get hold of rather than something that you, that is more concrete, that we used to hang our youth ministry on, right? So we used to say, okay, guys, we're going to do like a skate night because skating's cool. And so like you do your skate night. And so now that's much more complex. And I think seeing that in inner city London, particularly in my context, and I think across the UK more broadly, then that's something really interesting. And I really loved your question, are kids good? And like, what is the answer to that? That's a good question. Because I think we think kids are good, so we'll listen to them. But we ain't going to do anything about what they say. So we do the like, kids are good, so we'll listen to them. We listen to them, and then we don't actually do anything with what they say to us. Certainly as the church, I think. And so they're good enough to listen to, but not good enough to do anything about. Like we don't like, as long as they don't mess around with what we're doing here, we'll listen to them because they're good enough for that, but they're not good enough to like move that into some sort of action. That was just a couple of thoughts I had. Joy. Sam.
You've just said to both of us. Now we don't know who's going to speak. Go on, Joy. If you got something.
I thought that was so interesting. I thought the stuff about time and trying to engage with young people, trying to make youth work a thing alongside all the other things, and that sort of energy in trying to make it like the funnest, coolest, best place for young people to hang out. Sort of a lot of that energy in competing with the other things. I sort of was aware that was what we have been doing and what we like. It resonated. I sort of recognized that in some of the stuff that I've been trying to do, especially with the Sunday morning group, and like being aware of, you know, that lots of them are doing. I just couldn't get like another evening a week. Just trying to fit in another evening in a week, and all of the negotiations of actually they were extracurricular up and busy and doing, and I sort of really felt that and that coming from a place of really wanting to give young people opportunities, really wanting to give kids actually like the very best, like if we can expose them to as much as possible, even if everything ends up in the graveyard of lost, like unaccessed or like not quite things, if we can fill everyone's time up, we can give them as much opportunity as possible, they will find their thing, and they will be happy and healthy, and that will be really important in their lives. And it is, but then a sort of fitting into that, I think, has been a real challenge, and thinking about what that then means for youth ministry, and what that then means for church just generally as well, I guess. I found that really helpful to think about. Yeah. Becca said that sometimes she felt like a PR or a communications degree would have suited more than a youth work degree. And I feel like that. Like a lot of the time it was just so much about like how great we are, and how useful as well. Like lots of trying to prove that that it was worthwhile, that we weren't trying to waste people's time, and actually sort of realizing that wasn't just like on my own doing that. It's quite nice.
Yeah, that's great.
Sam.
I've done a lot of thinking and a bit of writing about parents. And one of the things we say about parents is, a lot of my conclusion about parenting is we want them to do faith at home, but man, they've got no time, and work is taking more and more of their life, and kids are at these clubs, and it's how do you fit it all in? And I just thought it was another insight into just how difficult it is being a parent. And I think sometimes as children's workers and youth workers, we get a bit angry with parents and just think, if they just brought the blooming things, and if they just supported us a bit better, everything would be okay. And I think there is a sense that, like, from my growing up in the leafy suburbs, there was certainly a sense, I guess, within my family. And my mum may be watching this, and she could be about to come into the chat box and ruin everything they stand for. Let's see. But that it was going to be okay. Get him through his A-levels, get him to uni, and it will all be okay. I proved them wrong by failing my degree. But there was this sense it would all be okay. And as you say, it wasn't, unless I was going to do something really crazy, I was probably going to be okay. And I just thought that was a really interesting insight into the stress that parents are under now, in that there is a much less of a sense of it's probably going to be okay. There's a much stronger sense of a lot of stuff can go wrong, and a lot of stuff, that it used to a generation ago was taken as read, such as the first job will probably enable you to get the first house, and that kind of stuff is just not a thing anymore. And so I think all that uncertainty seems to put a lot of parents under a lot of stress.
Did you want to respond to any of that, Andy?
No, I think that's really right, and I hope that folks listening do pick up that we should have a great deal of compassion for parents, that they feel like there is a lot at stake here. And part of it is, particularly if you have, some kind of level of privilege, you feel like you have just an absolute lot of options. And so, but if you make the wrong one, that could be bad for your kids. So should they be involved in this, or should they be involved in that? And how do we negotiate that? And so it really is out of a deep love and a deep investment in their kids' lives that they think that a good parent is one who gives their kid a menu of different activities to be involved in. And what becomes difficult as a children's worker, as a youth worker, is usually your program is relativized as another thing. And so now parents have to make a decision of, okay, do we have a chance to study with the best trumpet teacher in, South London, but that conflicts with youth group time, or whatever, so which do we choose? And so it's not just parents have been overtaken by the devil. I don't think that they really are driven by trying to do what's best for their kids, but that puts them in a conundrum, I think.
I'm just going through some of the questions, which are amazing. Some of them I feel might be better on our second panel piece, because I wonder if you'll get around to answering them in the next piece. There's one from Mike Harrowing. Your description of awareness of being...
I mastered with Mike. Can I just pause and say, hi, Mike, how you doing? I did masters with Mike.
He says,
Carry on.
your description of awareness of being good makes me think of the development of being woke, i.e. being morally and socially correct. It seems to me, though, to be an internalization of self-shaming and judgment of others. How can we help young people navigate this landscape?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I do try in the book. This is the ugly plug for the book. Try to pick up some of those things because I think that's really true. And one of the things I'm trying to balance here is to say, yeah, we find ourselves in certain problems, but these are also kind of good things. And so the fact that people can feel like their identity and their own experience really matters, but then that leads them to have to get recognition for that at all turns. And that if your identity is only internal, the more complicated element of this that we just can't quite get into today, at least in the presentation part, is that if identity is internal, there's still this problem with it that you have to express it to other people and get feedback from other people. So then your identity only becomes stable if you get recognition for that, which can lead to certain levels of competition. And people who don't recognize your identity the way you want it to be recognized can easily become your enemy as you kind of battle for recognition. I mean, this is part of the other problem, I think, in our Western societies is we kind of feel like recognition for identity is a competitive game. There's only so much recognition. And if you're a teenager particularly, there's only so many people who have their eyeballs on you. You know what I mean? Like at your school or even on your social media, it becomes quantified in how many likes. Well, another way to build your identity is actually to point out, to cancel, to shame even at times, especially online, other people as a way of working out your own unique identity or showing others that your identity is really unique. So in the book, I use, I've used too many pop culture references here, but I used the Demi Lovato song, Sorry, I'm Not Sorry, which is a kind of the perfect song of internal identity, where she wants recognition in a certain way, she doesn't get it, and she feels absolutely justified in tearing someone else down because she feels violated, that someone hasn't given her the recognition that she deserves. Now, at one level, recognition is really good, and all people need to be recognized, but it can become kind of hyperized in a certain way where we start to look for who's for or who's against us, and it can play at that level.
Yeah. Any other thoughts, Sam and Joy? I was going to ask Zoe's question. In the book, Lorena's death experience woke up the youth worker and the youth group, not just to be for fun. So there's that like change. Is COVID-19 enough of a shared experience and disruptor for youth ministry in the UK to be valued and valued and practiced in a different way? The fear would be actually the Church of England plus parents are not really ready for that. Would changing our current practice actually be the end of viable youth groups and receiving funding pay for youth workers? It's a big deal.
Yeah, that's a big question and an important one. I'm not sure about the second half because I just am not embedded enough in the UK context to know. So we'll leave it to others to reflect on that. Can the pandemic be this kind of experience, this disruptive, halting experience that leads us to question where we're at? It could be. It's just hard to know what will come of this. And as I develop my second 20 minutes, I'll talk to you a little bit about how parents make these decisions when they start ranking the thing, like what maybe is tacitly in their mind as they make those. And it is really true that this pandemic time, at least in the American context, and I can only assume this is true in the UK context, this has been the ending of all things. Like you were working your whole life to even have the thing of graduating, and all of a sudden graduation is on Zoom. And you were preparing all year for the big football tournament in May, and it's gone. Or your thing was, your team in the Premier League, and that was you're gonna finally see Liverpool win it all, and will it happen? Like all these things that you could have built your life around, that were these activities and things, have all been stopped. And that does give us a sense of having to rethink what a good life is. Because most of what we've sensed as a good life has all been projected, as I'll talk about here in a minute, into the future. But for the most part, we're bound now in the present. And we haven't lived this way for maybe 100 years. I mean, like where it is just the now that you have to concern yourself with. But all religious forms of practice do have a sense of attending to the now, of being embodied persons in the now. But late modernity always pushes our minds beyond our bodies and to be thinking about the next thing and how to harvest more resources for your future. But there is, and this sounds bleak and apocalyptic, but at least right now there is no future. Like, will universities have students on campus in September? At least in the States, we don't know. And you've been working your whole life since you were in 7th grade to get the marks to be able to go to the best university. And now it's online, like any school, like your high school just was. So it could be, but it's just hard to know what happens out of this. But it is definitely a moment that that leads us to ask, what is a good life? Which I think is something that is the first step we need to take. Like, what does it really mean to be living a good life?
I think there's like a parity.
Yeah.
There's like a parity as well now between parents of both children and youth workers. So, like, because now they're like, whether you're a child or you're a young person, whatever age you are, from like 0 to 19, you're generally, if you live at home within your context, you're at home with your parents, and so like suddenly there's a lot more. Whereas before, you might have been, if you were a teenager, you might have been out and about and not necessarily at home so much. So there's also like a bit of a parity there, which is interesting.
Yep.
Yeah, it is a fascinating thing to see the sudden influx of time into family life. And that so much of family life is about surviving and just trying to get through the next, just get to half term. And so many things that we put so much value on, suddenly, all that work to get that project done. And suddenly we're getting letters from school saying, just get what you can done. It'll be okay. This stuff really isn't as important as it. What? We could have died. And now it was really important 2 months ago. We gave our lives for, getting.
We were up till 3 a.m. fighting to get this thing done, and now all of a sudden you're saying it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
it's extraordinary.
It is. Good. Are we in for a break now?
I think it's break time. Yeah, 5 minutes. Grab a coffee.
Great. Thank you, Andy. And we will hear from you post break. So everyone,
I'll introduce you. Obviously, we won't just throw you out there.
I don't even know where I am, to be honest. I'm just in some digital space. So yeah.
Great. Cool. So we've got 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Grab a coffee.
Great. Thank you. Wow, thanks a lot. There was a lot there. Joy, Katie?
Yeah, that was great. Thanks, Andy. I am interested in thinking about and exploring the idea of what how we communicate and how we I really resonated with what you said about it being about like youth ministry and children's ministry being about a good life now. And I think that is a space that we inhabit really well. I wonder about how we communicate that, how we share that with the families that we're working with the young people, with the children, with the parents that we spend time with. What does that actually, what might that actually look like, I guess?
You like me to respond now, or should we?
I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's in some ways it's really the difficult thing we have to lean into in the real growing edge. But it at its most practical, it will be about exposing young people to as many stories as now. And I think part of the job of the children's minister and the youth worker is to be around our communities, both in the church and outside the church, and inviting people to come in and narrate their experience to young people. And it isn't, I think, to narrate your experience of what it means to be living the good life isn't always just to say, everything's going great for me. I'm super happy right now. But to really talk about these moments of wrestling and of pain and how God is meeting them in the midst of it. So I think in some ways it gives us a very different disposition, because in American youth workers and children's ministers hate this, but in this kind of framework, it does cause you first and foremost to just wait, to just be together and wait for the stories to come, wait for the relationships to deepen, but ultimately wait for God to show up. And usually, especially if your job is to shine up the thing, you don't have any time to wait. Like if you wait, ballet is gonna beat you every time. I mean, football, they're just gonna keep streaming football. If you wait, you're dead. But then you just keep on racing, and we fall into traps that I think are not very, very helpful. So yeah, it seems very counterintuitive, but I think it is to breathe, to wait, and to be a person with them, and expose them to stories of persons.
Katie?
Yeah, I think, I don't know, so much. I think similarly, the piece on story is something that really fascinates me, and like, how do we encourage parents to sort of see the bigger picture of the input that faith can have in their child's story, and the importance of getting their children around other people of faith. When I've done kids ministry, I struggle when parents sort of go, I want to be there, like what you're saying, like we're there, and then they just don't come, or they give last minute excuses. And I think my heart like breaks of like, how do we help them? And sort of what you were just saying, like, how do we enable a conversation to happen that alleviates some pressure and alleviates this sort of, I should do this or I should do that, to like grow my children's faith, but also doesn't then delegate lots to the church, and finds that happy medium of the church playing its part and the parent playing its part, and they're working together, the church community bringing story, the parents bringing those values into the home, and that like the bridge of the two is something that fascinates me.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is really interesting to think about how children, that children in this perspective, potentially, children can lead us more than they could if it's a battle for the thing.
Yeah.
Because there's a certain way where children, especially younger children, are fundamentally in the moment. And that's one of the reasons that they can minister to us in a very beautiful way. So Rosa talks about how children are resonant beings, that they kind of resonate with the world, and to watch children at play can be a fundamentally spiritual experience. So how do we even build narrative around that? And so often middle-class parents even think of play as for some other good. Okay, we want them to play because it's developmental, and if it's developmental, then they'll be more advanced educationally. And then if they're more advanced educationally, they'll be able to get into that Oxbridge school. And then if they get into that Oxbridge school, then they're going to make a lot of money. And then they make a lot of money, they're going to have a big house. And then if they have a big house, then they'll be happy. Which is kind of a crazy kind of way to think about it, as opposed to living in this moment now and being with and for each other. So I think there's a really significant place that children can play theologically for us in that.
I think there's a significant piece on trust as well. Like, actually, what does it mean for parents to trust that God has the best for their children, to trust that He has their plans in hand? And actually, yes, parents, I'm not a parent, so I'm maybe totally naive, but it's like it's not trying to force something to happen, but allowing God to speak and allowing God to move and trusting that you'll do your part, but trusting that God will also do His, in that balance.
I think there's like,
where waiting becomes really important in that as well. Yeah.
I think that takes like a new level of maturity and experience, possibly from our youth ministers and children's workers. Like just the whole idea about being present with young people as they're present to God, but present to the young people in the story. So we're not like, if we're in that relational piece of work, whatever it might be, and whether we're lost playing like table tennis or whatever it might be, that like just being in that space and not thinking, right, I need to get this through here, I need to get this done here, I need to do all the list of things that has, and then we've got to take the register and make sure that they're going back to the, all of the list of things, that actually just be present in that moment to both yourself and your story and God and what God is speaking and how God is living through you and how you're like ministering in that moment with young people takes, I think takes quite a lot of maturity in like in both your faith and also your experience to work out. And I think I find some like tension there with some of the youth ministers we've got coming through are great, but like don't have like loads to go on in terms of experience around those things. And I think that's a challenge in terms of our youth ministry, in terms of like probably at our strategic level, but or whatever, managerial.
Yeah, and right, and then that's, yes, the managerial level is really important, because I think it becomes really hard to have that disposition in a community that won't allow you to have that disposition. You know what I mean? Like if you're especially if you're a young youth worker and you really feel the church you're working with and for, that they don't want that they just want you to make the youth ministry or the children's ministry the best thing it can be, well, you kind of are stuck and you have to do that. So this kind of level of maturity, as you're talking about, definitely is the children's minister or youth worker themselves, but it's also the community that they're in and how much the community can have a vision for this as well. So that's a good point, James.
I like we could carry this on till next week, but clearly we can't. So thank you for your input. I'll hand over to Katie and Sam.
I've wandered on. I'm doing the Zoom equivalent of when the host stands on the edge of the stage and looks earnest.
Right.
Hey, we're out of time. Thanks, Joy. Thanks, James. Just to say that we're going to continue this conversation this evening. There are 23 questions in the question box right now, which we're not going to have time for. So we're going to try and talk about them this evening. We'll have a look at them this evening somehow. Andrew, come back for a second if you're still there.
I'm here.
Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you for getting up moderately early for us.
Yeah, no, thank you. And thanks everyone who listened in to this, very strange thing of trying to talk into your computer. So I hope it was valuable. So thanks for having me. It's an honor to talk with you all.
Thank you.
And we really, really appreciate coming. We will put a link to the book Scrolling Past. We have actually read it as a team. So not only did we guarantee you 6 sales, but we also have all read it. And so we can vouch for it being really good, really readable and really interesting.
Yeah. Even if you're a children's minister, highly recommend it. There's lots of things that are applicable.
I don't know why I'm saying this while Andrew's still here, but he introduces a new idea halfway through the last chapter that for a children's worker is really interesting. Yeah. So if you're a children's worker, make sure you get to the end. Just saying that.
Good. Thank you all. Blessings.
Thanks, Andrew. Really appreciate your time. So, Katie, what are we supposed to plug?
This evening,
yes.
Levi's going to put the link in the chat for our conversation this evening. If you want to continue this conversation, do join us. And then we've got our normal webinars next Tuesday and next Thursday, same time as normal.
Prayer is Wednesday mornings.
Wednesday morning. 9:30.
9 o'clock, 9 till 9:30. And yeah, hope to see you guys around.
Thanks so much for joining us from all over the world. It's great to see you.
See you later.
See you next time.
Do we? Oh, sorry.
Hey James, I'm just leaving it open for people who are saving the chat for a second.
I see. Are we going to meet in the other room?
Yeah.
Cool.
Cheers.